welcome back to another one of these panels. We are so excited to have everyone with us today. As always, we're going to start off with a fun question. So everyone can introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. The question for today is, what was the last thing that made us all really happy or brought us joy or just something that we're grateful for? So I'll go first and then I'll pass it off to other people. My name is Sia. And the last thing that made me really happy was that my dog has learned how to open my bedroom door by just butting his head into the door. And so he's learned how to invite himself into my room. So that made me really happy. So I will now pass it off to Akshay.
Okay, my name's Akshay, obviously. And the thing that made me happy is coffee, and I drank coffee with this t-shirt, so it was kind of nice. I'll pass it on to Vyaas.
Hey everyone, this is Vyaas. The thing that I'm grateful for is I had a really good week at work. I learned a lot of stuff, work related and non-work related, things about Chennai where I'm living. So it was just a really nice week where I learned a lot of stuff. So that's what I'm grateful for.
Hi everyone, this is Krupa. The thing that made me happy the last time was a stray dog came to my home out of nowhere and gave birth to 6 beautiful puppies. It's like so much happiness. I'm planning to adopt some puppies from that, and it really makes me very happy. I pass it on to Ilakkiya.
That is really wonderful news, Krupa. The thing that gave me a lot of joy was last night. So I was learning how to play Karen with my dad, and I managed to pocket the red coin in one shot from the center of the board. So that was pretty great. And I'll give it to Deepak.
Right. So the thing that made me really happy in the past week was reconnecting with a really old friend of mine. I hadn't spoken to him since we graduated from school, and we had a really long conversation. It was just like old times. I've always found that having good social relationships in our lives is something that contributes a lot to my happiness.
So the topic for today is self-image, and there's a lot of words that start with self, but then it sounds similar. It also means similar things. So let's get the definitions out of the way. So what's the difference between self-esteem, self-image, and self-worth? Is there a difference, or there's no difference? We just like use different words just because we want to? What's happening there? Okay, Ilakkiya.
So I can easily distinguish between, I know the definition of self-esteem and self-worth. So it's like self-esteem is how much wait, never mind. It's hard to distinguish between those two. Self-esteem, at least for me, is how much you value yourself, right? Based on what you know about yourself, do you think you're a great person, you're a bad person? And to have a positive or negative self-esteem is to focus on your good things, your strengths, and to have a low self-esteem is to focus on your weaknesses. Self-worth, I think, is pretty similar, so I'm going to rely on someone else to distinguish that.
Okay. Sia?
I really like what Ilakkiya said. It is difficult to distinguish between them. I think self-image is limited to how we perceive ourselves. So that's just the act of thinking about ourselves and the whole perspective that we have on that. Self-esteem is how we value ourselves or how we esteem ourselves to be in terms of what we're good at, what we can contribute. And self-worth is how I believe we globally recognize what other people think of us and how other people recognize our ability to contribute to society. That's how I understand it.
That's actually a great way to define things. Does anybody else disagree with it? If not, we can go to the next one. Deepak?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. So I agree with what Sia says. I think self-worth comes down to some way of defining your status relative to others. And that can vary in a local context and in a global context. You might be a great football player and very respected by your team, but you might be a lower level worker in your office, and you might not have a lot of status there. So historically, this has been we were hunter-gatherers, and then whoever was the strongest and could beat up a lot of people had the highest status, right? And then that changed. Agriculture was invented. We started cooperating more, and it was not so much. There was not as much intra-group conflict, fighting for mates and things like that. Monogamy became a norm, and we learned to cooperate more as a species. And that has led us to a level where we are able to cooperate in large enough numbers to have democracies, to have meritocratic institutions, and so on. And what's happened in more recent decades is that we are not only seeing our own small tribe, but we're able to compare ourselves with basically everyone in the world because of social media. And so our way of measuring our self-worth changes. But then again, it's also become possible to gain status in so many niche avenues these days that that is something that is available to more people than at any point in history. Yet the problem is that because what we see on social media is a very curated version of other people's lives, and we see our own flaws and faults in full color. We are comparing ourselves to an image of perfection that does not in the real world exist, and that in itself has mental health implications.
So how does social media play a role on our self-image?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, like Deepak said, yeah, it plays much bigger role because the number of people we personally know may have not changed that much, like compared to say 100 years ago. Like let's say 100 years ago, you knew about 30 people on a very personal level, 40 people, 50 people. So that 50 maybe it's gone down, like the number of close relationships we have with people, like the way we connect with people's lives. So that number may have stayed the same, like how much we know, but the number of people that we view as strangers, like Deepak said, has increased. So that's what social media drives, in terms of knowing the curated versions, like to use that expression of people's lives. So I think that plays a very negative. I wouldn't say negative. That plays a role where people with say people who are trying to understand and grow, once they are put into that platform, once they are put into that environment, it may be difficult for them to grow out of it. It may be difficult for them to say, I have my achievements, I've gone through these things, and so it makes them harder to judge themselves in an objective manner. So it becomes a clouded sort of judgment. So that's what I think. So what do you guys think? Yeah.
That's very interesting. I'll go to Sia first, and then we'll go to Deepak.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point about how we only see curated versions. Going off of that, we also don't have space for nuance on social media. So there's a lot of well-meaning people putting out advice or sharing things about themselves, even if it is, to a certain extent, not curated. But there isn't a lot of nuance, and we're living in somewhat of a post-truth world where if you see something on an infographic, you're inclined to believe that, oh yeah, someone's put work into this. You might not have the time to like verify everything that's being put out there, especially about how people relate to other people or what they think about the world. And then when that doesn't work for you, some kind of advice doesn't work for you because it doesn't have enough space for nuance. It's not a hour-long YouTube video. Then I think it affects your self-esteem, where you think, oh, this advice seems to be working for people. It's not working with me. I must be uniquely awful. So it's not only through comparison, but it's also through consuming a lot of content that is not necessarily addressing your intersectionality or, where you are. It's one person just taking, a gander at a very specific part of human existence, and then it's supposed to somehow work for you. And it doesn't always. So I've definitely fallen into that trap where some self-care advice hasn't worked for me, or, some way of like setting up boundaries hasn't worked for me. And I've thought that, oh, wow, so yeah, there's something wrong with you. So yeah, what do people think about that?
I hear what you're saying, and it makes sense. So there's definitely the question of, do we have nuanced debates on social media, especially when it comes to controversial topics? And the answer is absolutely not. The format and the way these algorithms work is that they want to push more emotive content to larger audiences, because that keeps people on their websites for longer. And 70% of what you see on YouTube is because of the recommendations tab, and they recommend whatever is most likely to go viral, and that is proven to be emotions like outrage, right? So it is true that social media is making us more angry and question ourselves more, but at the same time, I think there's a brighter side to it as well, because these days people find a lot of support networks on social media. And if you have, like, for example, a marginalized community, you're a gay person, for example, you might find other people who also have the same worldview as you and have gone through the same experiences as you. And so in an earlier era, that might not have been as easy or as possible. So it's a question of, how do we manage social media? How does it need to be regulated so that people can still get the good side of it while reducing some of the drawbacks of it? But I think it's not been a universally bad thing for people's self-image or for their mental health. It's also helped people find connections. It's helped people build relationships, even businesses online. So yeah, there's two sides to it.
So when someone does have a negative self-image, then how can they escape it? Or, like, let's say, how do they deal with the insecurity?
So basically, it starts with challenging our negative thoughts. So when we feel insecure, when we see people around us, so we tend to tell ourselves bad things to know about ourselves. So the first thing would be to challenge them, to listen to what we talk to ourselves and challenge them. Ask challenging question: is it really true? Is it 100% true? Is it going to end like this? Are you basing it on a fact or your emotion right now? Things like that. Challenging those negative thoughts is the first step you can take to fight your insecurity.
That's a very good point. And like, asking questions is good, because sometimes you aren't you wouldn't think the same thing if you were thinking rationally, but then like, something has happened, an event has occurred, and because of that you have a temporary negative self-image, and you are reacting to it. Deepak?
Right. So to add to your point about questions, right? One thing is whether you're asking the right questions or not. Because when something goes wrong, a lot of us have the tendency to think, oh, everything in my life is going down, and I'm never going to feel better again. But most of the time, we vastly overestimate how badly we will feel if something happens, and we vastly overestimate how much judgment we get from the world. And at the same time, these are not particularly productive questions. Like, if you had a bad day at work, you might want to ask how you can be better organized, for example, and then think about what your strengths are and weaknesses, limitations, opportunities, and so on. But if you were thinking more broadly and saying, why am I a failure, right, that is not a helpful framing of the question. So how we frame the question and how we limit the scope of the question matters. I think that makes a difference to our narrative, and it challenges some of the more unproductive ways of thinking, like Krupa said.
Yeah, it is very true that we need to ask the right questions within the right scope. I would even add that sometimes when you have a negative self-image, while you think really negatively about yourself, it doesn't mean everybody else around you thinks the same way. But then, since you are thinking it, you tend to think that others do too. But that's not really the case. Ilakkiya?
I want to build off something Deepak said of like asking the right questions, right? Because that's really easy to fall into, of like, why was today a bad day versus why am I a failure? That's definitely an important distinction to make. And a word that I found is like thought distortions. So that's like distorted thoughts that are unreal, untrue, exaggerated, things like that. And I think one sort of distortion would be the scope of your success or failure and limiting that accordingly. So addressing thought distortions will definitely help counter a negative self-image. Like, you have to recognize when you're being extremely negative to yourself, when you're having negative self-talk. Another thing I wanted to share is to not compare yourself to others. I think it's really easy, especially in competitive societies, to see other people and say, why are they doing so much? I'm not doing that much. I suck. They're great. So there's a quote, like, comparison is the thief of joy. So, like, don't compare yourself to other people. I've fallen in that trap a lot throughout college of, like, other people have more friends. They have social groups. I only have a couple of, like, individual friends. They're getting internships. I'm not. They're doing all these great things. I'm not. And so avoiding comparison and recognizing what you are doing within your abilities and what you need to be doing at that point in time will help avoid comparison and avoid lowering your self-image.
What role does a parent play on a person's self-image? And we have this stereotype where parents sort of compare you to your cousin, you to your friends. So what's the best way a parent can what role do they play, and like how can they play the role well? We'll go with Kripa first, and then we'll go to Deepak.
Okay, so even our self-talks are majorly impacted by our parents. Imagine you have a kid. Whenever the kid does a mistake, you know scold the kid. You are always doing this. You are a failure. You won't do anything better. So every time the kid does a mistake, year on foot, he tells the same dialogue to himself whenever he's doing that mistake. So it is important that be kind to your kid and talk to him in a way that he will talk to himself in the future. So this is very, very important, the first part of building a self image. The child sees himself like you are seeing him when he is growing up. So parents play a very, very important role in a child's self image.
You bring up an excellent point. The studies for this is like the words that are used are positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So both can do a good job if it's used well, but like it has to be done in a balanced way. And if you do one excessively, then of course you would have negative effects. Deepak?
Right. So what you're saying makes sense. And I agree with Kripa's point. What I want to add to that was I read something about three kinds of attachment styles. So there's secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment. And that is something that is formed at a very early age. So your early childhood experiences shape you in that way and determine how you form attachments with other human beings. And so if you have a secure attachment style, then you tend to be more forgiving, you tend to be more optimistic, you tend to be happier in life, and it leads to a lot of good outcomes. If you're anxiously attached, you're always thinking, am I loved enough? Do they really love me? And you're always questioning that. And if you're avoidant, then you avoid being close to other people, right? Each of those insecure attachment forms have their own drawbacks. And how our parents relate to us in our early years has a really defining impact on how we attach to other people throughout our lives. Of course, this can be your attachment style can be changed. You can get over some of these insecurities by building close long-term relationships with people who have secure attachment style. But it does matter how your parents treat you.
That's a very excellent point, and we will add some resources on the description for attachment styles as well as positive and negative reinforcement. Does anybody else have anything to add? Ilakkiya?
So I wanted to further add on a point that you brought up about positive and negative reinforcement, because I learned about that in 12th grade, and I think it'd be helpful for the audience to hear. So there's 4 types of things you can do in response to behavior: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment, where the positive and negative are whether you're adding something or taking away something. And the best ways to help kids or raise kids, I think, is both positive and negative reinforcement. So what that is with positive reinforcement, you give something good to the kid, like, oh, you finished your homework on time, you get 1 extra hour of like video game time. And negative reinforcement would be taking away something bad, right? Like you say, if you don't finish this on time, you have to wash the dishes tonight, right? So if they do their thing, you can say, okay, good for you. You no longer have to do the dishes. So you take away something that's negative. Positive punishment and negative punishment are not great. Positive punishment would be adding punishment to the kid. Oh, you didn't do this, now suffer, and you give them something bad to do, or something the kid would perceive as bad. And negative punishment would be taking away something good. Like you didn't do your homework, you can no longer play games. You can't watch TV. You can't go play with your friends. So try to use positive and negative reinforcement.
Good point. Sia?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, sometimes realizing that if you're in a place of not good self-esteem or not good self-worth, or when we discuss things like attachment styles or, the way that our parents have spoken to us, that can be another way of us defining what's wrong with us. So it creates this vicious cycle of saying, oh, I don't have good enough self-worth. And so then you're perpetuating the idea that because there's something wrong with you, now you have lesser self-worth. So just a quick reminder that in discussions, it's not, if you resonate with any of the things that we talk about, it's not that, that's a label or that's a condemnation or that's where you're supposed to stay. It's more of like, it marks your place on a spectrum where you can easily move in on. So yeah, just a quick reminder, I've definitely fallen into that circle of, oh, this has happened to me and that has happened to me. Even just having low self-esteem made me feel worse about my self-esteem. Like, oh, I should have healthy self-esteem. Like, there's nothing wrong with you if you don't have healthy self-esteem or if you feel that way. There's so many factors other than just how you perceive yourself. So yeah, just putting that out there.
Very good point. And I do want to add that parents, when they do stuff, they want to do the right thing, irrespective of whether they do the right thing or not. And so hopefully, like when they learn this, they would try it out, and hopefully it works for you. Anybody else have anything to add?
I just want to bring up one point. So this question, yeah, I thought of the age-old nature versus nurture debate, like how much of a person's upbringing and environment shapes that person's lifestyle and the choices they make in adulthood. So is it in their hands? So like I'm more of on the side that parents play a lot in what people think in adulthood, and the criminal justice system is tied into that aspect as well. So if someone is taking drugs when they're 15, or if someone falls into like a practice that's not really helpful, so a lot of that plays into, I wouldn't say only parents, so parents and the system around that. So it's very difficult to blame the individual, like in a justice system that's looking to just put the bad people away and not, or put the bad people away and not fix the system. So parents play a huge role in a lot of other things. So on the macro scale, even in the country's criminal justice system, parents can help, with bringing up good citizens.
Deepak?
Right. So I wanted to add to a point that Vyaas made about nature and nurture. So I read research yesterday that showed that about 50% of our happiness or baseline life satisfaction, that's the word used in the paper, is determined by our genetics. About 10% is determined by what happens to us in life, the events around us. And the remaining 40% is determined by how we choose to react to what's happening to us and the attitudes that we have and take to the world, the values that we have, things like that. And so it is in this 40% that we have the largest potential to move things about and change things. So it would be productive for all of us to focus on what we can control and how we react to things, how we make sense of things, as opposed to thinking that this is all predetermined and what's going to happen is going to happen.
Thank you so much. And we'll add that study down in the description as well. Is it better to have a positively biased self-image or a realistic and a balanced self-image? And of course, it is not an objectively positive or objectively balanced or realistic, but rather it's according to you. You think of it as a bit of a positively biased or positively or a realistic and balanced self-image.
I feel like either is good. If it is not realistic, it should not be in the extreme levels. None of us are like portraying ourselves in the real self, right? When we meet someone new, we only bring our ideal self and say things about us which we want to be true. So none of us are like, with no bias. We are not portraying ourselves, our true self. But once that non-realistic thing becomes extreme, like some people believe, no, they are the king of the world or god or something like that. That is delusions, and that is causes of a lot of other mental illnesses, mental disorders. So it's okay. Either is okay, but it should be in a controlled manner. That is the point.
Right, Kripa, just for the record, I am in fact Batman. Just letting you know. But no, seriously, I think in some matters, even an unrealistically positively biased self-image could help, because there are a lot of things that we don't think are worthwhile risks, and so we don't take them. But then the risks do end up paying off. Like, for example, if Elon Musk had not had an irrational amount of belief in himself, he would not be the richest man in the world today, because no ordinary man or any person, right, could imagine that they are going to be worth $200 billion on any given day. Nobody can believe that of all the 330 million people in the United States, they would be the president of the United States one day. There is no rational basis to believe these things. You just have to have an irrational amount of belief in yourself and keep going. But at the same time, you have to be resilient to things not working out in your favor, and not start putting yourself down and letting that really hurt you. So it's a tough balance to maintain.
Yeah, Deepak and Kripa made some excellent points. I'm not sure who this quote is attributed to, but it's something that stayed with me, is that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but when you walk into a room, humility is believing that everyone else also has something to offer. So going back to the discussion that we had about self-esteem versus self-worth, I think it's totally okay to have a more, positively inclined self-esteem, because that's going to empower you to, do whatever you want to do and be more resilient. But in relation with other people, that's when things could get a little bit delusional. So if you start acting like you deserve more than other people, or you're superior than other people, then that might be an issue. So it really just depends on where you're putting your anchor in. Is it in self-esteem or is it in self-worth? Because that's both of those are still part of your self-image.
That's actually a very good point. Just because you have a good image of yourself doesn't mean everybody else does, and think of themselves a bit less than you. And while it is okay for you to have that image, it doesn't mean that everybody must. And if you look for it and don't get it, then it's not really their fault. Ilakkiya?
I would ideally like to say that we should have a realistic and balanced self-image, but because I know that most people react extremely negatively to negative news, like there was a study done where the time, like if something really happy happens to you, like you got a promotion, you got a new car, something great, your happiness increases for a temporary amount of time and it goes back to normal. But for sad events, like you react more extremely, more negatively. So you should have the positively biased self-image so it can counter the negatively skewed reaction skills. We don't see all the good things that happen to us. We just focus on what things were our barriers, what got in our way, and we react like extremely sadly to them, or like not extremely sadly, but extreme sadness or negative thoughts. So skews on both ways lead to a center. That's good.
Okay, let's actually get everyone involved in this. Everyone, you don't have to give your reasoning, but just say which side you pick: positive and biased, or balanced and realistic. Which side do you go? Let's start with Deepak.
Right. Hey, so I'm going to go with positive and biased. And I'll just add a quick point to what Ilakkiya said. What she mentioned about us getting used to good things happening, that is called hedonic adaptation, which is why we don't stay happy about it for a long time. And the human the average human being is found to react to negative news with 5 times as much emotional intensity as positive news for evolutionary reasons. And so we should definitely make it a point to find things to be grateful about, which is why the first question was really good about what makes us happy and things like that. We need to consciously make note of these things, maybe even write them down every night, so that we have a record of what good things have happened, and we have a more balanced perspective of the world, because I think naturally we are negatively biased as human beings.
Okay. So too positive anyway, and very good point about this thing. Let's go to Krupa next.
I can't decide. I go with both.
No, you have to pick something.
Let me think.
What is going on here? Why does she have to pick something? Wait, because this is a question that because this is a question where, you know, in some situations you need to have a realistic and balanced self-image. And let's say your house is burning down, right? You can't just go out and say I'm Batman and, you know, try to figure that out. You need to have a realistic image where you say, you know what, I'm going to be broke for the next 1 year. And so there are some cases, like some cases where your house might be burning down. Like that's just an example where you need to be realistic and you can't be overly optimistic. That can actually harm you in some sense. I don't know. That's what I think.
Definitely agree with that. It's especially when negative things are happening, it's good to have some amount of realistic outlook on it so you can respond accordingly. Sia?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the side of nuance and take what makes sense for you, because some people start off on the inherently negative view of themselves, and so maybe radically thinking the world of yourself will balance things out for you. And if you're somebody who started with a lot of cognitive dissonance about, hey, I think the world of myself, but things keep going wrong for me, then you might need to work yourself back towards the center. So I'm all for nuance here.
How does one's self-image affect interpersonal communication, right? So this is kind of relevant to how we were talking about how our self-image should be right now. How does that affect the way that you speak with other people and interact with them?
Deepak?
Right. So the less you feel the need to prove yourself to others, the more open you are to listening to them, to being empathetic to them. And I think all of us have this certain parts of ourselves that remain in the shadows, and we only share with people we feel close to, right? And everyone really just wants to be validated, for the most part. Everyone wants their own concerns to be heard, to be acknowledged. And so if you are able to non-judgmentally do that with someone, then they're going to feel close to you. And to be able to do that, you need to be at peace with yourself, to some extent, because otherwise you're going to be trying to compensate for your low self-image, and trying to make yourself feel better in all your interpersonal relations with other people. But ironically, helping other people feel better is something that makes you feel better about yourself.
You bring up a good point. Sometimes people tend to get offended because they have a negative self-image of themselves, and they particularly feel bad about this specific thing. While you may have not just meant it as a joke, you may have not meant it as an actual bad thing. They might still feel bad about it, and of course they would react negatively to it as well. And outside of that, with interpersonal communication, as Deepak said, we don't share everything with everyone. We also tend to see whether they are equipped to have, like, do you think they can have this tough conversation with you, difficult conversation with you, and how close you are. And yeah, that definitely plays a role as well. Ilakkiya?
So I want to think about it in terms of how your self-esteem affects the way that you come into a conversation. If you have a positive self-esteem, you're going to be confident, you're going to be comfortable in whatever situation you're in. You believe like you have some good things about yourself that make you qualified to be there. even in an everyday scenario, right? Like if you're negative, so if you have a negative self-image, it would really make you like timid or like cowardly in a way, like in the way that you might come to a conversation, you'll be afraid to talk about yourself. You imagine like the visual of someone hunching their shoulders, head down, like that's how your self-image will affect the way you come into that conversation. You won't share much, you'll be doubtful after every sentence, you'll say like, oh, but that's just what I think, or I don't really think that's true. That is actually called sandbagging, where you cut down yourself before anyone else really says anything, undervaluing your opinion and constantly doubting yourself. So that's how a negative self-image would come into the way you speak, but a positive self-image would make you comfortable to stand your ground, say what you think, not really like doubt it twice, because it is what you think and all you can talk about is just your opinion. So there's no reason to doubt it.
So we've covered parents, we've covered friends and everyone else. So next thing is God. So with religion, like, can religion be considered as self-help? Deepak?
Right. So my answer would be yes, because as far as we're aware, human beings are the only species that know that we are going to die at some point. And so we have to find a way to reconcile with that fact while we are still alive. And our search for meaning comes from that. We can have all of our needs and wants met, and we would still be searching for meaning. Science and art serve certain functions in life. So science tells us what is, but it doesn't tell us what ought to be. Art, even as beautiful as it can be, can distract us from our quest for meaning, but then we are a meaning-seeking species. And so inevitably, the one thing that we've found which tends to penetrate the loneliness of the human soul is the kind of profound love that a lot of religious leaders talk about. And in times of crisis, that is when we find that we need some space of spiritual refuge, some God to turn to, something to make sense of the impermanence of everything around us and why bad things happen. And it is in times like this that I feel it really helps your self-image to see that you don't control everything in the world and that you cannot find answers for everything. And sometimes you just have to accept the uncertainty and ambiguity that makes up what life is.
That's actually a very good point. With if you're not able to control everything and things are not going well, I hope at least there's someone else like controlling it, like which in this case is God. And it's also a good point about like like we don't know what's going to happen after death, and that does scare everyone because any time like there's something unknown, it scares us, and because of that, in this specific case, like with religions, they tend to tell you what will happen to you, and irrespective of whether you believe in it or not, it's good to at least have some clarity as to what is going to happen. We'll go to Vyaas next and then go to Sia.
Yeah, so I have a slightly different take. I was talking with my colleagues here at work about religion and what it meant. So there are certain things in Hinduism where there are certain days where you fast. There are certain days where you don't cut your nails at night. So these are things, or the things that you don't do on certain days, and all these practices fell under religion, or say giving charity, the concept of charity. So the way I look at this question is, so religion or the concept of God was a tool to make people do things that weren't backed up by science then. So now we have proof that fasting can help on days. Now we have proof that by giving away charity or being nice, being kind to people can help your positive self-image, positive self-esteem. So the people who are smart and people who are looking at these different things on how to improve the human body and the human image, they didn't have the science to prove what they were saying. So they were using religion as a means to market whatever they were trying to do. So that has transformed into different things. Now we're looking at religion in a very strict manner, but not taking what it's supposed to mean. So we're only taking like the literal sense of, hurting each other, things like that, or the differences between. So I look at religion as a way of just, they needed like a brand. Like now we have Instagram or other things to market themselves. So religion was a tool for them to market these good practices that weren't backed up by science then. Now a lot of them are being backed up. So like fasting, like Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, all of them have the concept of fasting. It's just that a lot of people don't follow it. I don't either. I used to. So things like that can help your self-esteem. Like fasting does have benefits in some. So all these tie into your mental health as well.
That's a very good point. People learn things better when it's told in a story form instead of just like facts. And not everyone's going to go and read a book and like learn everything, or Google the right facts and see why it's coming. Whereas it's just easier to learn these values through a story, and religion definitely does give that. Sia?
So I'm not an atheist, but just to make this discussion a little bit more inclusive for any of our atheist friends listening in, I feel like religion, as everyone said, helps us ascribe meaning to where we're going, and that definitely helps with self-esteem. But religion can also sometimes tend to dictate how we should feel about ourselves. And religion is another thing that's not as frequently updated at the source, but more so by people, and people are not free of faults. And people can say things with a lot of conviction, but that doesn't make that true. And so with anything, and now substituting religion for like self-help influencers or just strong people on the internet, or even some therapists to a certain extent, there's a lot of people who are very keen on telling us how we should feel about ourselves, and the only kind of filter that we can have between that, be it even if it's coming from a book or it's coming from people who have proclaimed to understand that book, it's probably still just their perception of it, right? Or if it's people around us, that can change how we feel about ourselves. So question everything, question absolutely everything, because no one who's your friend doesn't want you to what you're saying, or what they're saying out there. So yes, they're giving you structure for meaning, but for anything that's written anywhere, no ideology, even if it's an ideology that's telling you that you should feel good about yourself, should be given a free pass. So yeah, it's helped me to use my own radar of my own, moving away from morality or religion and more towards efficiency and how I make the people in my life feel and how I feel. And the long-term consequences, or even the short-term consequences of things, might be another way that you can go about people.
That's a very good point. Questioning is always a good thing. Just because like a text says it, understand why it makes sense, and whether it still makes sense, whether you should still follow it with like traditions. See whether was it messages that were created as traditions for the years that year in which it was created, or is it does it still make sense now? Yeah, very important to question things. Deepak?
Right. So to add to what Sia said, I want all of you to answer this. Right. How much do your values, however you define them, affect your self-image, and in what way?
Krupa, do you want to go after this?
No, I had another point to add on religion. Maybe if someone is answering Deepak's question, maybe I can answer later.
Okay.
No, say your point. That's fine.
So yeah, religion as self-help. Uh, Actually, I want to share a personal experience. I lost my pet recently. So the religion I follow says there is reincarnation, that the pet comes back and you might meet them in your lifetime, or you might meet them in your next lifetime, and such things. But seeking answers from other religion, I found this beautiful place called Rainbow Bridge, where your pet waits for you in the gates of the heaven, and once you go to heaven, they come inside with you. That's such beautiful thing. That one thing helped me to help me grieve effectively. It helped me. Now when I miss my pet, I think about a Rainbow Bridge, my pet waiting for me. It helps me so much. So such things in different perspective of different religion will help you. But I also want to add that most of the religions are based on guilt and shame. The you know there are a lot of musts and should, like Sia was talking about. But once you go into that, it is going to severely affect your self-esteem. Like, I don't know if you have, if you're following Lil Nas music video right now, where he goes to hell. He talks about how, as a kid, people kept telling that he was going to hell because he was gay, and that you can you imagine how terrifying it would have been on him, how he would have perceived himself, in such a bad light. Religion does that to us. So it is important that we don't like take every must and should, but there are so many beautiful other things that we can, like, that will help us a lot.
I'm really glad you
Yeah.
brought up the point. Okay, Vyas.
No, I was just I was just super impressed by when she mentioned that, because I've been listening to that song for a while now, and I don't know how I missed his songs, the ones he came out previously. I've listened to Old Town Road, so and there's Holiday as well, which is good, great visuals. So the point about this song, right? So it's really awesome, because I was watching this one video where a pastor from one of the churches in the US, so he was reviewing this video, and and there are certain things which he said, like, that was just striking, in a sense that he talks about dancing on the devil, like he gives a lap dance to the devil. So it's kind of it's kind of like a like a response, like in the best possible manner, to all the people who who prejudice, or who put who bring the element of shame and guilt in conversation. So it's a really great song. Like, I still haven't understood meanings of a few of the other songs. Like, I'm still trying to understand how the visuals correlate with the meaning. But it was a great song. Yeah, good mention.
Good point. Good point. Deepak.
Right. So one way I thought it would be useful to look at religion is that historically it's played a certain role, and today that might not necessarily be completely relevant. For example, most religions at some point of time served as state religions. So it was a way to organize the people of that state, get warring tribes to unite over some kind of principle, right? So I'll take the example of Zoroastrianism in Sassanid Persia, which was pre-Islamic Persia. So at the time, they had their state religion. They would fight wars with the Byzantine Roman Empire, which was then Christian. And so one way that they united their own people and gave them common cause was using the religion. And so religion, because it was dictated by the state in those times, most religions would also have an element of religious law, which tells you how you should conduct yourself in society. And that different religions obviously have different levels of involvement in your personal conduct. But in some of that, we would have to question whether it really makes sense in today's world. Others, of course, like Vyas said, they might just not have had any other way to back it up and say, well, this is what God says, so you have to do it, right? Some of that, of course, we have scientific backing. Other things we don't know. So it's very hard to separate because now we have all these secular states, and there's separation of religion and state. And to some extent, that comes from Christianity, where there's this biblical verse that says you have to give Caesar his due. Caesar is the king, and give God his due. So these are two separate things. I think it is useful to have this kind of separation framework so that everybody, regardless of what faith they follow, has the same rights under the overall legal framework. And religions are able to be questioned as all ideologies should be questioned. Like, I'm really against this idea of blasphemy and not being allowed to question religion or not being allowed to criticize it. I'm against that. I think everybody should be free to make up their own minds about these things. But there was a historical purpose that these ideas served, and so we have to think about it in terms of, is it relevant today or not?
Yeah, that's a good point. And yes, it bodes well with Sia's point as well. Like questioning things is very important, even if it's religion. And blasphemy is not a great way to like continue that, because you tend to be scared to not question it, and that would definitely affect you, as like with Kripa's point, where just because they're gay doesn't mean they're bad, and just because a religion says it, people, everyone who follows that religion, they're being asked to hate the person or view them in a negative way, and that definitely doesn't help. What are the pros and cons of self-help books?
So I read, so I read somewhere the only way you benefit from a self-help book is writing it. So most of the self-help books are just generalized advice. It mostly starts with like, I was like this, I was so bad at this, and suddenly I did something, and then now I'm better. So you guys also should do this. These are the rules that you have to follow to become a better person like me. So it is so generalized. It's just so personal experience. If something works for me, it is not going to work for someone else. That's why we as psychologists work towards individuals, but people who experience it is nice that they're sharing their story, but then at the end of it they give you rules. No, you have to follow this to become a better person like me. So I don't think so self-help books are that effective. It also gives you like a instant gratification or instant motivation. Like if I read a book now about waking up at 5 a.m, I might follow it for a week or two. Then that's all. Like after 6-7 months, I don't even remember the contents of the book. It's like I should read it again. So that if you want to have like a short term motivation or short term help, like when you are in a bad place, it will help you, but I don't think so it is effective in a long run.
You do make a very good point, and I do want to add one thing, which is sometimes like when I read self-help books, what I do is once I finish reading the book, I either listen to interviews from that person, or maybe join a Facebook group who talks about that book, because that like I get to like see it repetitively again, and because of that. Even though it would be not for a long time, after a point, I would sort of register it in my mind. Sia?
I love that point. I absolutely love that point. Thanks for that, Krupa. Am I back? It says my connection is unstable.
Yes.
Okay, love that. So I was definitely somebody who fell into the vicious circle of reading as many self-help books as possible to avoid doing the work, or to having a thesis on why you're feeling what you're feeling, or having a whole paper written on this is why I'm not being productive right now, doesn't actually excuse you from doing the things you have to do. So sometimes it can also be a distraction. Sometimes it can also serve as that instant validation of I'm doing something that's going to help me be a better person, and it's not necessarily translating on the material plane. So I think that's always a good disclaimer. Also, a lot of these people are offering a different perspective, and that perspective is coming from like layers and layers of worldview that has been built by like Deepak said, your genetics first, and then everything your parents have done, and then everything that people around you have done, and everything you're seeing on social media. So yeah, might not work for everyone, but good different perspective doesn't excuse you from doing the work you have to do.
Yeah, this is a very good point you bring up, which is sometimes people just go into this wormhole of just like listening or reading self-help books, and while, as Kripa said, it will give you instant gratification, if you don't do any of those things, then it's not really like making having an effect on you other than the instant gratification. So that's definitely not going to help. But the way I see it, it's sort of like interacting with successful people and just like learning about them is I see it more of a thing. If it's used in the right way, it can have a good effect. Vyaas?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm have slightly different take. Just like how we said, you need a positively balanced self-image, positively balanced image, like an optimistic image versus a realistic image. So it's kind of like that. It really depends on the person. Let's say someone there's actually two different subparts to this question. So there's self-help content, self-help books. So the people who are committed to reading books are a very small fraction of the entire population. So, and the people who read books, I think, in the sense that they're more willing to put in the work in terms of recalling that and putting that into action. So you have to tie what you read to action, and picking up a book is itself an action, a time commitment. And watching a video is different, because you're just randomly clicking 5-minute videos, and your memory lapses, your concentration, you're distracted, things like that. But with a book, you can't do that. You got to read the book, and you can't be doing 10 different things when you're reading a book. So when it comes to self-help books, so the people who are picking up books, they have some sort of goal on why they're reading the book, why they're buying the book, or why they got it from the library, because that's all an investment. Looking at videos, that's something you already have on your phone. You don't need to invest in anything, not even 1 second of your time. Comes to a book, they're putting in the effort. So I feel like they are more willing to follow through and tying that to action, recalling, and things like what you did, Akshay. So writing it down and seeing how to like. So in those ways, self-help books and self-help content is different thing on Instagram, YouTube. So that's a whole different, we can have a whole different talk about that. But when it comes to books, since this question is about books, so the way I view self-help books, so so there's personal development books, and I like reading autobiographies. So I sometimes view autobiographies as self-help books. So there's a couple of books I wanted to mention. So there's one written by this guy called Seneca. So he was a king, back in Greece, and he wrote these list of 124 letters. It's called Letters to Seneca. And so there's one particular one which I keep going back to. It's called Meditations. So you can find all that in the description. So it's a really good letter, because in the sense that he was a king, and he was living the life, because it was his genetics, and the family was born into was such that he was in a very privileged position. So what he used to do was he used to just not eat. He used to just live like a pauper, and just put himself in those situations and document those experiences. So it's not like he was bragging about it. It was just he was writing about it, because that's the only way to keep themselves keep that story going, or keep a record. So that was a really good book. So I view that as self-help. But if you look at this strict definition of self-help now in the 21st century, it wouldn't fall under self-help. It would fall under autobiography in a different section in the on Amazon or a bookstore. And another book is Playing It My Way by Sachin Tendulkar. So there's ways you can idolize and take it to the extremes. So I'm not trying to like idolize those people or bring. So I'm just trying to say, like, books like autobiographies can help, with people who can derive some meaning from that. So I learned a lot, from that, and I was able to connect with old friends, people who I didn't end on the right note. So things like that. So that is action, like doing something that you can correct yourself if you have remorse. So bringing that into action, like bringing righting a wrong some way, that can happen with self-help books. Again, in some cases, not always.
Okay, so I just wanted to appreciate what Vyaas said. I also am a huge fan of Seneca and his philosophical writings. I've found generally that Roman Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, what they've written about virtue and how they look at the world, it may not be entirely applicable to my life, but a lot of it, whether it falls into the self-help category or not, I don't know, but it has helped me find peace in life about things that I had for a very long time struggled with. So I just wanted to say that.
Just real quick, I wanted to, I guess, reiterate Krupa's point that self-help books could help in the short term. I know that like a couple of years ago, I was feeling really terrible, and like even the smallest inconvenience would break me down. I didn't really like see a lot of point in like what was my future going to be like, what was I going to do, who am I, what am I supposed to do, what is the meaning of life. So I was feeling really bad. And at that point, I picked up a book by Mark Manson, title of which I will not say. And it can help in the short term, but I think the more enduring factors, like I don't remember everything from that book. I just know that it helped me in that moment. And more enduring things that would be self-help are kind of like mottos that you come up with based on experiences in your life. Like I have this ongoing phrase of like expectations lead to disappointment, and that helps me deal with every single situation that I ever get disappointed in. Or I have like an acronym of like DEST: drink water, eat well, sleep, and manage your time. And like that helps me too. So coming up with things based on your own experience might be more helpful and enduring than reading a book.
I can sum up what I learned from just hearing other people talk today is, focus on what works for you, trust your own knowledge when it comes to how to build your own self-esteem, or, have a value system or a morality that you've defined by, different things that work for you, be it stoicism, be it religion, anything that goes for you, and keep other people in perspective while you're doing the same. And I also really enjoyed people's discussions of self-help and how, depending on where you are in life, that's going to help. And with everything, just have balance. That was my biggest takeaway. So yeah, self-esteem or otherwise, strive for balance.
I really enjoyed the conversation about like having a positively biased self-image, and how since we tend to react to things negatively, it's good to have like a good strong foundation in what you believe is good about yourself, so that any negative things that happen, you can take them with a grain of salt. You can still adjust yourself to meet any corrections as needed depending on what it is. And just think about the things that affect your self-image. What times, what situations do you start feeling really bad about yourself in? And try to see like what's the surrounding situation. Did the other person mean it? Did they know that they were harming you? Is it something you're inflicting on yourself? Is this an irrational thought? So just try to think about what are the causes of when you feel really bad about yourself, and can fully address them.
Right. So first of all, this has been my first time on Chittalayam, and thank you all for having me. And it's been a great discussion, really respectful, no name calling, which I really appreciate. While we've had productive disagreement, which is something that really matters, right? Because if we don't present different perspectives on these things, then it's just an echo chamber. And this has not been like that, which I really appreciate. Closing thought, it occurred to me that having a good self-image in many ways comes from learning to overcome our aversion to discomfort. Because the things that hold us back, the things that make us feel bad about ourselves, are when we choose not to do something because of discomfort, and then we judge ourselves for it. Learning to get past those frustrations, to manage frustrations and live in accordance to our values, I think that is what ultimately makes us feel better about who we are. That's my perspective on this.
So I learned a lot today, and about self-help when they were talking about autobiographies and some of philosophical aspects also. So that helps us understand that self-help is not a generalized thing. Whatever helps us to feel better about ourselves. And I also want to add, like, always be kind to yourself. Treat yourself how you would treat your best friend. It is easy to talk negative to ourselves and say anything that comes to our mind just to ourselves. We have to challenge our negative thoughts, and sometimes a particular um, e- event or a particular person might have said something to you very long back, and that is still with you as a belief system. If you can identify that and challenge that, it is easier to change your self image and stop judging yourself, and mainly forgive yourself for whatever you've done, and it'll make your life better.
So the point about I really like the terms used: sandbagging, hedonistic adaptation. So these are terms I think that are going to stick with me, and I'm going to try to find out what it means in Tamil. So, and a couple of other languages, seeing if language plays a role in these conversations. Yeah.
That would actually be very interesting how language plays a role. And my closing thoughts are something that I heard from Deepak, which is like the 50%, 10%, and the 40%. I really like the fact that we do have control over 40%, and that's like pretty good with, and I'm okay with that. So, and the fact that I can control 40%, then I know like I can work on having a positive image at any point, irrespective of a good thing has happened or a bad thing has happened. And I really like the discussions like with regards to self-help books, self-help content, as well as how religion plays a role. They were all very interesting, and questioning things is also something that I really do encourage, irrespective of whether it's religion or just facts, because like because of the world that we live in. So yeah, there was a very productive discussion, and I love hearing insightful perspectives from everyone. And thanks so much for taking time of your lives to be part of this. You guys all have a good day.
Thanks for watching. For more discussions, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Also, make sure to like and comment more topics that you'd like to see us discuss. We'll see you next time.